welcome to the show. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, I'm delighted that my guest this week is an author joining us from California. She is fellow of the Manhattan Institute, an author, commentator, and an attorney. Her most recent book is called When Race Trumps Merit. It's been hugely widely reviewed in America. I'm delighted that she's going to be joining us today to talk about it. Welcome. It's good to see you, Heather.
It's a great honor to be with you, Peter. Thank you so much for having me on.
Before we go any further, I do want to read out the full title of the book. There's quite a long subtitle, but it absolutely explains it, which is, well, of course, as we said, it is the When Race Trumps Merit, but it's how the pursuit of equity sacrifices excellence, destroys beauty, and threatens lives. This is an extraordinarily important book, Heather, I think. And we obviously follow events in America. It's pretty much the same here.
Yes.
I wonder whether you could actually start by explaining to us a concept which runs through the book, which is something called disparate impact. Once you explain it, I know it become crystal clear, but could you explain what you mean by that?
Right. Peter, disparate impact is the concept that if any kind of meritocratic standard has a disproportionately negative effect on, above all, blacks, it is a per se racist standard. So we have in the United States standardized, computer-graded, objective, anonymous admissions tests to get into college that evaluate high school seniors' academic skills. Right. And black students do particularly poorly on the SATs. And therefore, the SAT exam as a marker of college readiness has a disparate impact on blacks. What we have decided in the United States now, that we will tear down the standards rather than say meet the standards, put in some more effort and meet the standards. If a medical school uses a similar test, the medical college admissions test, which is the medical version of our SATs, again, colorblind, objective, neutral, computer graded, again, blacks do poorly on the MCATs. The MCATs have a disparate impact on blacks. Therefore, we are lowering the bar for the MCATs. There's a movement afoot to get rid of the MCATs as a way of evaluating medical applicants. This is happening. It's been going on for decades. Any kind of minimal literacy test for qualifying people for taking on firefighting jobs or police jobs, there again, traditionally you have had blacks scoring much lower on those exams. And so we sue saying the exams are racist and we throw out the exams. This, Peter, is a recipe for civilizational suicide. We are destroying the concept of excellence. We are removing incentives for achievement, hard work, and accomplishment. And we are asking not just for mediocrity, but for actual threats to human lives, whether it's with regards to the qualifications of doctors, with how we do medical research, how we do our police training, and in the case of the criminal law system, the reason why crime has been shooting up to astronomical levels, and we've seen record-breaking increases since the George Floyd race riots, is we're also not enforcing the criminal law in the United States, Peter, because it too has a disparate impact on black criminals. So we are putting, above all, black lives at risk under this phony idea that any neutral colorblind standard that has a disparate impact on an underrepresented minority is per se racist.
So basically you can't actually demur from that one definition, isn't that right? That basically a little bit like the idea of equity as opposed to equality. Essentially this must be the reason, and if you don't have the right proportion of ethnic minority or whatever, that somehow this automatically makes you racist, makes the organization racist, or that's really what you're saying?
That's you've put your finger on it, Peter. Right now in the United States, the only allowable explanation for any racial disparity in any mainstream institution, whether it's a cancer research lab, whether it's a law firm, whether it's a bank, whether it's a foundation, whether it's a news desk, if there are not proportional numbers of underrepresented minorities there, the only allowable explanation is racism.
Yeah.
It's a racist test, it's a racist qualification. These tests have a disparate impact. What I hope to do is provide people with the actual explanation. We are not a racist society. Our standards are not racist. We were a racist society. America was an apartheid state. It was a white supremacist state. I have no hesitation about admitting that. I also have no hesitation in stating without qualification that that is not the reality today. The reality today is not white privilege in America, it is black privilege. I will believe in white privilege when I hear of a black high school senior applying to college who checks the white box in the race box because he thinks that being white will be an advantage to him in getting into college. The reality is this: if you are a heterosexual white male in the United States today, you are at the bottom of the totem pole. You will be the last considered, the last hired, and the first fired. So black privilege is our reality. I want to provide an alternative explanation for why we do not have exact racial proportionality in our mainstream institutions, and that is the academic skills gap. It is vast. Here is the sad reality, Peter, that Americans are so non-white supremacists that if they close their ears to these truths, they do not want to hear it. But this is the fact that explains why when you look at a research lab that is trying to solve Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's or early stage dementia, it is not likely to have 13% black oncologists. Here's the reality. 66% of black 12th graders, our 12th grade is the final year of high school before a student begins college. So we're looking at 17 and 18-year-olds here. 66% of black 12th graders do not possess even partial mastery of basic 12th grade math skills, which are defined as being able to do arithmetic or read a graph. Right. 8% of black 12th graders are competent in basic 12th grade math, and the number who are advanced in 12th grade math is too small to show up statistically. The picture is not much better in reading. 50% of black 12th graders do not possess even partial mastery of basic 12th grade reading skills. That means that you can have diversity, which is the goal of every single American institution today, or you can have meritocracy. You cannot have both. But right now, as you say, Peter, the only allowable explanation is racism for racial disparities. And as long as that is the case, it is all coming down. Every institution of civilization is coming down.
Actually, there's something that's happened in the news today, Heather. Literally, I saw it in the newspaper about an hour before we were speaking, which is absolutely germane to what we're talking about. It relates to the Royal Air Force here, our Air Force. So it's a matter of national security. And a leaked email basically has emerged where RAF, you've heard about this? RAF staff were instructed.
I can see it coming. Please, tell on.
The RAF were instructed, their staff were instructed to stop choosing, quote, useless white male pilots. We don't have enough BAME, ethnic minorities or female. So as we don't have enough, stop doing the interviewing. Stop interviewing the whites. This has been an ongoing thing with our Air Force, actually, but this is just new. And I just sort of, when I saw this, knowing that we were going to talk, I thought I'd bring it up because, of course, this is happening in Britain, exactly the same thing. What I was going to ask you, Heather, there, you said it's all coming down. I would agree with you on that analysis. But do you think that the people that impose, for example, these particular what you might call, well, what used to be called affirmative action, but I mean, what is essentially, the hiring basic function at the moment. Do you think that they actually believe it? Do you think that they really think their institutions are racist? Do you really think or do you think that in fact they just want to bring the thing down, and so this is a good way? In other words, maybe more of a kind of outright Marxist thing.
That's a very interesting. Usually the alternative for your question, Peter, is do they believe it, or are they just virtue signaling and wanting to get credit from the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Guardian and the Telegraph? But your alternative is just we just want to bring it down. I like that. That's sort of closer to what's reality. But first, let me just comment on the RAF. Let's just be honest, Peter. What we are seeing in society today is white culling. I write about this in the book, the culling of the white docents, the volunteer arts educators at the Art Institute of Chicago, one of the great world art museums. It's quite blatant. The words are different, but there's many institutions now that will simply brag that we've gotten our proportion of whites down from 66% to 55%, and that's just an obvious good in itself. And it's repugnant, but the fact is, it would be less worrisome if the use of racial preferences, and I reject the term affirmative action, which you used, because people still are naive enough that they think that affirmative action just means, oh, we'll just do more outreach. We'll put some job notices in a community paper and make sure that we're casting a wide net, but we apply the same standards. No, that is not what is going on here. If you want to use the term affirmative action, just make sure you understand that what it means is racial preferences, i.e. completely dissimilar admission standards. So getting into medical school today, objective standardized test scores and a grade point average that would be automatically disqualifying if presented by a white or Asian applicant to med school are virtually automatically qualifying. You will be admitted if presented by Black and Hispanic medical school applicants. So we have almost dissimilar expectations of competence. So it would be maybe tolerable if, in saying we want fewer white pilots in our Air Force, if the alternatives were equally qualified. And so but what happens is, as I say, you can have diversity or you can have meritocracy. And if the RAF is saying it wants diversity, the chances are very high that it is sacrificing meritocracy. And it is willing to put in pilots who would not meet a colorblind, sex-blind test. If they would, then it's still offensive, but a little less worrisome. But really, the reason for most of our racial disparities is there simply are not enough qualified candidates of the preferred melanin content and gonad possession content available, and therefore we have to lower standards. As far as whether the gatekeepers that are gleefully accusing their own traditions and their own institutions of utterly phantom racism at this point, I think they do believe it. I think that they are so committed to this self-canceling, suicidal civilizational narrative that the defining characteristic of Western civilization is oppression, which is absurd. The West is no more oppressive, and in fact much less oppressive than every other civilization on earth. Were we oppressive? Yes. Show me a civilization that was not. Did we have a discourse against oppression and in favor of equality? Yes. And show me any other civilization that did. They all poach on Western concepts of equality, on British concepts of limited constitutional government, of citizenship, of the rule of law, of the presumption of innocence, the great tradition of due process granted the world by the British case law and common law system. But I think you're right as well. Well, on the one hand, I think they believe it. I think that there is some weird thing going on in the West right now that is trying to just cancel itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think what struck me as well about your book, Heather, was, I gathered that you are a music lover, that you love the arts. This is something that has preoccupied us a lot at the New Culture Forum. My own background is in the arts. Particularly in America, there's been this sort of outright attack. We're seeing it too, but on classical music, for example, it seems to me that the reason I bring this up is because we're talking about these kind of employment situations, and which is one thing. When it comes to the arts, particularly, it appears to be the very presumptions behind the thing which are basically being attacked. So when it comes to music, you talk even about the idea of tonal music and the idea of notation of music, all of these things, very basic things, not to do with hiring people, but the greatest achievements of the West are the things that are most under attack. If I just use a comparison here, it's a slightly different comparison, but certain famous British or English authors very much sort of under attack, and basically being rewritten with sensitivity readers and things like this. It's no, surely no. Well, for example, we have P.G. Wodehouse, Ian Fleming.
Unbelievable.
The latest one to actually get this treatment is Beatrix Potter.
No.
These are. Yes. So, I mean, essentially, I think I'm asking you a couple of questions there, Heather, but these are the great kind of products of that Western civilization. And in your book, you spend a lot of time explaining how this happens, particularly with, say, music. And I just wondered whether you could tell us, particularly, for example, in relation to the hiring of musicians for an orchestra, how that has changed.
Well, first of all, if you Brits don't stand up for Wodehouse, you deserve to lose him. I mean, he is one of the great prose masters ever, one of the great masters of irony, of voice, of wit. I was so fortunate that my father read me a huge, I don't know if every single Wodehouse novel, but most of them. I am so grateful that my mother knew enough to read me the great classics of children's literature, British classics of children's literature, whether Wind in the Willows, Alice in Wonderland, Beatrix Potter. These were books that formed my imagination, that allowed me to have a place to escape to in my self of innocence, of cleverness, of irony, of beauty, and that they're turning now on Potter. I mean, it is utterly heartbreaking. People have to stand up for these works because we will be dead without them. Our spiritual, emotional lives will be dead without them. Us mere mortals do not have that capacity of expression, of understanding, of being able to understand Ratty and the badger and Toad and the relationship between Peter Rabbit and Mr. I don't remember his name now, but the gardener. These are almost like the Greek gods. They are paradigms and icons of the human imagination, and the strategy that is used, and they're being torn down by the mob that cannot create, that can do
Oh, absolutely.
nothing but destroy.
Yeah.
Their
Yeah.
only power is destruction. And as we know, that is a heady, inebriating power.
Mm. Mm.
People love, it's sadistic. They love to destroy. Let the mob loose and it will destroy everything. And that's what's going on. We see this in Me Too movement, where females are tearing down males just because they can, on absolutely absurd grounds that getting a pass is somehow career ending and puts your whole life at risk. BS. Give me a break. Let's keep things
Yeah.
in perspective here. What's happening in classical music is the same strategy that is being used across the arts, which is that any European tradition, because it is European and therefore is demographically white, because that's what the continent was for
Mm.
centuries upon centuries, is per se racist. Because right now, all you need to do to discredit an institution or an individual is to label that institution or individual white, and that's all you need to know. You can see this technique go on in the New York Times every day. All it does is need to put white in front of somebody's name, and you've put, you know, the mark of Cain or the scarlet letter on that person. So in classical music, your BBC magazine has been one of the worst offenders. Now they've pulled
Yeah.
back, but after the George Floyd race riots, some of your columnists there were writing absolutely appalling columns, saying that the only
Mm.
reason that we listen to Beethoven is because he was a white male, and making sort of these facetious, utterly juvenile statements like, well, maybe the formula for greatness is 32 sonatas plus, you know, wild hair plus deaf or something like that. Give me a
Yeah.
break. The person should have been fired on the spot.
Mm.
Uh, you know, I'm not going to judge between Beethoven and Bach and Mozart, Chopin and Schubert and Brahms. They all are, when I'm listening to them, they are the greatest composer in the
Yeah.
world.
Mm.
But obviously Beethoven was absolutely revolutionary. His music was so
Mm.
groundbreaking that it was, you know, periodically, almost uniformly revised by publishers because they couldn't believe that anybody would dare write such harmonies. He expresses all of our spirit, and yet they are tearing down Beethoven because he's a white male. They're revising his works. They're changing out the Ode to Joy, An die Freude by Friedrich Schiller in the Ninth Symphony, Fourth
Mm.
Movement, choral ode for rap music. And the New York Times, former lead classical music critic during the George Floyd psychosis, suggested that when orchestras audition for new musicians, that they now do so in order to make sure that they can know the race of the musician by taking off the blind. Right now, the practice is widespread that you audition for an orchestra
That's
slot
right.
behind the screen so that nobody knows your sex, your race, your identity, whether you're, you know, related to some of the orchestra members or there's any kind of nepotism or favoritism going on. And Anthony Tomasini suggested we should de-blind auditions so that we can hire on the basis of race, not merit.
Yeah. Yeah. Quite extraordinary, actually, the result you end up with there. The point about this, though, Heather, again, I mean, I asked you earlier about the intentions of these people. You mentioned there George Floyd. Are you surprised, have you been shocked or surprised by the sheer speed with which this has happened over at least what we're talking about now? We're talking about 3 years, really. I mean, what happened here in Britain is the museums, you know all of this, I'm sure, but the museums came out with exactly the same line. The British Library, decolonizing. The British Museum, decolonizing. Kew Gardens, decolonizing. British gardening is now racist, apparently. I mean, it goes on ad absurdum, you know. I just wonder, are you surprised at the kind of concerted response that happened? I mean, you know, I'm not being conspiracy theorist here. It just seems extraordinary that there was a concerted, establishment-wide response along the very, very same lines.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, Tate Modern did this show on Hogarth,
Yeah.
and the wall texts were just absurd. You know, that there was white porcelain on the mantelpiece of one of the Hogarth paintings of, you know, decadent aristocrats, and so this was somehow, you know, related to whiteness and white supremacy and whatnot. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd. The gardening thing is incredible, just incredible. I have to say, I have the good fortune of studying at Clare College, Cambridge for 2 years. And
right.
my favorite memory of that was the gardens. It was the wonderful tradition of those gardeners wearing tweed coats, for God's sakes, and taking care of the hollyhocks and cyclamen with such love. And I just felt this amazing tradition that you feel going back to Keats and Wordsworth with the attention to nature. And the great tradition of British Romantic poetry. But in one sense, I'm not surprised because I've been following this for a long time. I'm not surprised by the speed of the response. It's been brewing in the academy and in corporations for a long time. I mean, diversity, the diversity consulting scam began in the 1990s. You had these charlatans. There was a guy in America named R. Roosevelt Thomas, who came out of Morehouse College, and he set himself as one of the first diversity consultants, and he would go around telling corporations that if they put a premium on promptness, on correctness, that those were values that didn't value diversity, and that the managers needed to rethink how they evaluated applicants and their employees for looking for promotions. So it's the idea that neutral standards of bourgeois behavior of accomplishment are racist has been out there for a long time. That having been said, I guess, yes, what I saw happening in the summer, June 2020 through July, August, with every single institution coming out with these preposterous, and in fact, somebody said that in the UK, you guys recently had 9 minutes of silence for the George Floyd 3-year anniversary to remember George Floyd, and pointed out that, you know, in your Memorial Day moment of silence, it's like 30 seconds as opposed to 9 minutes. That was the other weird thing. That is weird, that globally George Floyd became, well, not globally, let's be honest there, in the white world.
Yeah.
I don't think Japan is part of the West, and it's modernized now, but I don't think Japan has gone on the George Floyd bandwagon. But the European Anglo-American world, the Anglosphere certainly has. And it is extremely weird. And it's as if things were building up and then everything broke, and the degree of self-cancellation, and we can add to this in sort of the literal reproductive sense with the trans phenomenon, is just really, really insane.
It seems to me that, you know, with the trans issue, there is a kind of attack at the very foundations of sense of being. You know, that is to make people uncertain, to make people feel uncertain about what their very being is. I wonder, with this, I was about to say, where does it end? But I mean, the fact is, it seems to me that this is a revolt, if you like, or a movement that is top down. It is top down. That is what is extraordinary about it. If you think of it as being a cultural revolution, it's not come from, you know, the grassroots. It's being imposed actually on people. This is what is so extraordinary about it. And I think that America and Britain seems to have many similarities there, with one big exception, Heather. Obviously, you know British culture pretty well. There's always been a hefty dose of basic self-criticism bordering on self-loathing in the British character. Not so much in the American one. And that, I think, is what is so surprising about what has happened to American culture.
Interesting. I, yes, there is an irony there. I'm thinking of the 19th century British novel, one of the greatest contributions to world history, whether it's
Yep.
George Eliot or Trollope. Dickens, is there self-criticism, there's wit, there's irony, there's understanding, and then you think, of course, of the British Empire, which is fairly self-confident. But this is not my place to question or to try to fully understand that distinction. I guess I would say part of me, is sympathetic. I've been, for the last couple of years, Peter, on an audible listening reacquaintance, and in some case acquaintance for the first time, with a lot of civil rights history, Black history, and American history through the lens of race. And it is truly shocking how gratuitously cruel white Americans were to Blacks for so long. And my view is that our narratives, until recently, were way too triumphalist. There's a famous speech that Frederick Douglass gave in 1854, I believe, upon 4th of July, that is absolutely scathing, saying, there you are celebrating your commitment to equality and freedom. Yeah. What does your 4th of July mean to a Black slave? Nothing. This is absolutely galling and preposterous. And he was absolutely right, and I feel like he was right up until very recently as well. So the guilt that Americans feel about that is understandable. And we've got this revised movement for reparations now, and the traditional conservative response is, well, there should be no inherited guilt. None of us were responsible for that, and therefore, why should the economic burden fall on us? That's true as a logical matter. As an emotional one, though, I kind of understand the idea of inherited guilt. And so I would say, in one sense, if Americans were more traditionally confident and self-vaunting, that maybe a little bit of self-awareness was in order. And I, frankly, am still struggling with how you tell our history. Does every statement that is just referring to sort of the general progress of American history need a footnote, but see Blacks? Because there was, at every moment when we were rightly and courageously mapping out the Western continent, exploring, creating railroads, at every moment there was mistreatment of Blacks going on. And I can't really figure out yet how to balance those. I haven't reached a resolution. So as I say, part of me says, well, it's good for America to be a little less cheeky and go around proclaiming itself as the beacon of freedom when for so long it wasn't. But the thing is, I do think that we need to be empirical about it and say that whatever our past was, you can just look around. It is not the case. And how does this end? It ends, Peter, when people stop being vulnerable and susceptible to the race hustle. The lies that we are accepting in the name of fighting racism is just ridiculous. Like in the United States, we're supposed to believe that whites pose a threat to Blacks, that existing while Black is very dangerous in America because of whites. That is ludicrous. Yes, existing while Black is dangerous in the United States. Black juveniles in the sort of post-George Floyd world are shot at 100 times the rate of white juveniles. 100 times. Who is shooting them? Not whites, not the police, other Blacks. Blacks are killing each other off at barbaric rates. And as far as interracial violence, and I can tell you it's the same in the UK, Peter, Blacks commit 87% of all interracial violence between Blacks and whites and Blacks. A Black is 35 times more likely to violently attack a white than a white is to violently attack a Black. And yet, our national discourse right now is that white supremacy is the biggest threat to America and that Blacks are are under psychological and physical siege from whites. We have this incredibly maudlin race narrative, bathos everywhere. It's all a lie. It's going to end when people say, you can't scare me by calling me a racist any longer. I've got the facts, and here they are, and the facts are not racist.
I think the problem, of course, comes with critical race theory is that, you know, it's almost Stalinist, isn't it, Heather, in that they can sort of say, well, you say, I am not racist. But of course, that apparently is sort of further proof that you are in their eyes, you see. It's a bit like the old-fashioned ducking stool we had in the Middle Ages, where if you were guilty, you sank to the bottom. But if you survived, I can't remember, but whatever it was this strange kind of total non sequitur.
Right.
I think we've got obviously a slightly different history here, but equally, for example, a lot of the narrative seems to have been imported from America. But, for example, your average school kid here will not be that aware that Britain abolished slavery. I mean, right. The first country to do so, sending its Royal Navy around the world, for the next 50 years at great expense, making sure that this ban was kept in place. That was quite a long time before the American Civil War. But in fact, our schools do not teach us. This is a great problem. Schools are simply not teaching it. I wanted to ask, actually, you're in California. Are you in Los Angeles or San Francisco or?
I'm in Orange County, which is an hour south of Los Angeles.
Right.
I'm in Irvine.
I mean, one of the kind of, this relates to the book as well. One of the, the most reported fact really about California at the moment is that it's in a shocking state. But that also, in terms of, as you say, crime, there is this tolerance of what can only be described as a kind of low-level anarchy, that certain crimes now go unpunished. Is that something that one gets maybe distorted on social media, Heather, or is this something that is a thing, really is a fact?
Oh, no, it is barely reported the way it should be. And again, the key here, Peter, is disparate impact. The reason that we have these left-wing prosecutors not prosecuting trespass, theft, petty assault, resisting arrest from police officers, fare theft, jumping turnstiles onto the tube, it's all because of disparate impact. Because when you do arrest and prosecute for shoplifting, you will have a disparate impact on blacks, because blacks sadly commit crime at exponentially higher rates than any other group. That's just a fact. And the bodies speak for themselves. The bodies are the gold standard. Blacks die of gun homicide at 25 times the rate of whites between the ages of 10 and 24, because they're killing each other off at 25 times the rate. So we are not enforcing the law because it will have a disparate impact on blacks. And as a result, many of our cities are in a state of anarchy. You have, that combined with the mentally ill chemical abuser problem of street vagrants, and the subways are dangerous. People are getting pushed into the tracks, and there's just squalor. California, fortunately, I'm in Irvine, which is sort of one of the last good places in California, and I adore California nature and light. And I grew up here, and it's very hard for me to sever. I cannot sever myself from this nature, but the willed destruction of our cities is going on, and it is all completely avoidable. You can solve street vagrancy very easily. You enforce the law against street colonization. You just say you are not allowed to colonize streets. That was the rule for a century. It worked, and now the governments in the United States are engaged in what I call the great inversion. They now view their primary mission as catering to the alleged interests and needs of the antisocial, the dysfunctional, and the criminal. The needs of the law-abiding and the hardworking do not register on the policy-making screen of government. The hardworking taxpayers are treated basically as ATMs, as automatic teller machines. I don't know what the phrase is in Britain, but cash machines for funding the rights revolution.
It's extremely alarming. That's sort of creeping here, this kind of. Well, actually, we've got a sort of a different part of the same problem in that there appears to be a complete reluctance on the part of the police to actually enforce the law.
Right.
In certain with protests and everything.
Well, but let me just say, I mean, you have the same thing. You had that report from the Metropolitan Police, the black guy that was killed, Stephen Johnson, I can't remember his name, but that
Stephen
whole
Lawrence.
idea. Stephen Lawrence.
Going back quite some time, yes.
Quite some time. But it is the exact same strategy. And just be on your guard when they use this in the UK. The anti-police activists will always compare police activity to a population benchmark. And so they'll say the Metropolitan Police arrest immigrants, black immigrants, at a higher rate than whites compared to their population numbers. Therefore, they're racist. That's the wrong benchmark. The benchmark is who's committing crime. The police activity is predicted by criminal activity. And so you've had that as well. And periodically, your police leaders are saying, oh, we're so racist and we've got to back off. But I would say, what's going on there is we have lost faith in bourgeois values. We've lost faith in our right to say you will obey the law, you will be self-disciplined, you will defer gratification, you should study, you should not be truant. It's part of this whole suicide of the West where we are only criticizing ourselves. We don't apply those same standards to other civilizations, and for sure those civilizations are not engaged in the same self-criticism.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with that analysis. Begs the question, basically, is it too late? Are you pessimistic? There seems to be, I think, this kind of convention that one should look at the optimistically to the future, but basically sometimes reality just simply has a way of intruding.
You've given away one of the great secrets of public speaking and writing, Peter, which is you're absolutely right. I hate that convention. The rule is you got to leave audiences feeling, yes, we can win, and don't leave them all down and stuff. Well, sorry, guys, it's very hard to be optimistic, but, that is absolutely received wisdom is you got to come up with something positive and don't be so down all the time. And that's very, very hard. And I'm a pessimist by nature, and I've been observing the world on the cultural front for too long, since the late 80s, and I don't think conservatives on the culture front have won a single war. It just gets worse and worse and worse. That having been said, I'm actually not simply obeying the convention here against my will. I see little glimmers of hope in the United States, where you have some politicians led by this Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is actually fighting back and saying, I'm not going to give you taxpayer dollars to have these utterly absurd, costly, non-necessary division, lie promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging offices in public universities. You're not going to use racial preferences for admissions to undergraduate education or to law school or to medical school or business school. These are very good things, and I'm chagrined that I didn't think of these very simple solutions myself. So that is a good thing. And as far as rebirth, as ludicrous as the racialization of classical music is, and let me just say, I'm perfectly happy to hear a much broader range of composers Black composers that actually have been performed over the years. And what I object to with the rule now that we have to have a Black composer on every program is the rhetoric around them. I write in the book about Florence Price and Joseph Bologna, the so-called chevalier. These are both mediocrities. I'm happy to hear their music. Florence Price has some interesting piano music. I think her symphonic writing is very, very weak. But the rhetoric that says that they are of a par and the only reason they haven't been performed is racism is ridiculous. People that are connoisseurs have a duty to the truth and to make good aesthetic judgments of value. But that having been said, when I look, say, just at classical music, despite the political overlay, the level of professionalism and expertise and the unearthing of forgotten composers, especially in the early music movement that's been going on for 50 years now, beginning in Britain, thank you very much, with Handel revivals and early music revivals. There's still excellence going on. It is just operating under a pall. So if we could get rid of our susceptibility to the race hustle and stop being vulnerable to racial, being held hostage to phony ideas, then there still are people soldiering away in the trenches that are kind of keeping traditions going. I would say it's mostly in the arts. As you say, education is a disaster. And I'm not surprised that British students don't know anything about Britain's seminal role in ending transatlantic slavery. Of course, it didn't work in Africa and the Arab countries. They're still enslaving with no regrets and apologies whatsoever. But historically, the level of ignorance among average citizens is very, very worrisome. And young people are not getting exposed to literature, to art, to music, and that breaks my heart. And their lives are the poorer for it. They are leading any of us who do not have some artistic map of the past to understand the great drama of the evolution of style, whether it's in music or architecture or art. You're leading a stunted life. I'm sorry, I'm going to be honest.
Well, I think we're very lucky, maybe as a generation, actually, to have still had that experience, I think.
Yes.
Heather, thank you so much for joining us. We just have one question for our members, so if you'd stay with us. But
yes.
Thank you once again. Heather Macdonald there, the book is called When Race Trumps Merit. It's out now. Fantastic book. So please do get it. Thank you once again. We shall see you next time. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.